Thank you so much for coming to today's class. Good morning from Arizona with Dr. Jonnie Schnytzer, and thank you to our co-sponsors, Congregation Har Shalom at Park City, Utah, and Rabbi DeFries will welcome today's speaker of Jonnie Schnytzer.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'm Rabbi Jeff Dreyfus from Temple Har Shalom in Park City, as you said, and we are really honored and excited to be partnering with Valley Beit Midrash on this program and on many in the future. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker, our lecturer, Dr. Jonnie Schnytzer. Jonnie Schnytzer is probably the only PhD in Jewish philosophy focusing on medieval Kabbalah who can say that he once beat the head of the Israeli Naval Commandos in a swimming race. Very impressive. His dissertation focused on the scientific Kabbalah of Rabbi Joseph ben Shalom Ashkenazi. Jonnie's forthcoming book is about Ashkenazi's Kabbalah, as well as a critical edition of the Kabbalist's majestic commentary on Sefer Yesira. Jonnie is also the author of Mossad thriller The Way Back, which paints a picture of contemporary Israel. He also orchestrated the publishing of an English edition of the Hitler Haggadah, an important piece of Moroccan Jewish history from the Holocaust. Jonnie has also taken on several leadership roles in the Jewish world, including advisor to the CEO of Birthright and executive manager with StandWithUs. He lectures on a wide variety of topics relating to Judaism and Israel, especially about the untold stories and unspoken heroes of Jewish history. Jonnie is happily married with 4 gorgeous little kids, lives in Israel, and thinks that Australian rules football is the greatest sport ever invented. Welcome, Dr. Schnytzer.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Dreyfus. Thank you. It's really lovely to be here. So good afternoon, everyone, and it's nice to see some familiar faces again. Okay, so what are we here to do today? I'm gonna share my screen. Let's jump right into this. Aussie Rules Football does rock. Okay. As a kind of intro to our shiur, to our lesson, which is titled Animals as Kabbalistic Masters, right? What does this mean? What are we going to be talking about? Essentially, we're interested in animals. We're not going to say anything about animals as animals, but we're actually interested in human perception of animals, and more specifically, the perception of Homo mysticus, of the mystic or the medieval kabbalist, and more specifically of a specific trend of medieval Kabbalah that we will call cosmic Kabbalah. Anyone who's read anything on Kabbalah, you will discover something fascinating. You will discover that there are 2 major trends. Ever since scholarship in Germany in the early 19th century, right, sort of pseudo-academic, began to articulate, to investigate what is Kabbalah as part of a larger project of sort of, unearthing Jewish studies as a sort of future discipline. And throughout the 20th and 21st century, we find that medieval Kabbalah can usually be categorized by 2 different trends, 2 different schools of thought. One can be associated with the Zohar. Most of us have heard of the Zohar, many of us perhaps, all of us. And if one was to ask what is the goal of the Zohar or what is the goal of the Kabbalist in the Zohar, it is to unify the divine mommy and daddy. We're not going to get into what that means, but it says a lot about the importance of familial relationships, of relationships here, and the connection between what we do here and how it influences the cosmos on our journey to get to the happily ever after. This is Zoharic Kabbalah. Then we have the Kabbalah of Rabbi Avraham Abulafia. Unlike the Zohar, which is a kind of Kabbalah that one does not only find in the Zohar. You find it in many other texts in Kabbalists like Rabbi Yosef Shekatila, Rabbi Yosef Angelet, and so on and so forth. Rabbi Avraham Abulafia has what one could call prophetic Kabbalah. There, the goal is not to unify the divine Godhead, but it is to bring the mystic, bring homo religiosus to a point where you cleave where two become one with the Godhead. Whatever that means, we're not going to get into that. But if I had to categorize these two major trends in Kabbalah, it would be safe to say that while they are both theocentric, in the sense that both are about a religious system and finding the deeper meaning of that religious system, they are also both overwhelmingly anthropocentric. It is the human that is the center of the practice. If it's Abulafia, so we're looking at ourselves and seeing how we cleave through meditative practice to the Godhead. In fact, Professor Moshe Idel has called Abulafia's trend anthropocentric. And with the Zohar, even though it seems more theocentric, essentially the Zohar is a book that is a commentary on the Torah that is actually a story about 10 men, tzaddikim, righteous ones, the leader being Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and things happen to them and they learn things and they disclose deep secrets of existence. But in both cases, now that doesn't mean we don't have animals, and the Zohar is full of animals. But the question that interests us is, what is the purpose of the animal in the Zohar, let's say? That's not what interests us here. I'm giving this as background. I would argue that in the Kabbalah of the Zohar, the inanimate flora, fauna are all they're out of the cosmic equation. They're not part of the cosmic drama because the focus is on what the human needs to do, the way we keep mitzvahs, our intention, and so on. But I want to talk about a different trend of Kabbalists that, for the sake of our talk today, we're going to focus on their interest in animals and in the role that animals played in their Kabbalistic literature. And so, after another very brief intro into just animals in general, we're going to learn three stories. We're going to learn three stories that, if I had to bet, I don't think anyone here has learned because they are so unpopular. They are like, if you go into the Gershom Sholem Library of Jewish Mysticism in the National Library in Jerusalem, then you will see that the Zohar has an overwhelming majority of shelf space, and the texts we're going to deal with much, much less, but our interest is not quantity but quality. So we're going to focus on what we call cosmic Kabbalists and the role that animals have in their Kabbalah, and then we're going to ask ourselves, wow, if we have stories where we have animals as Kabbalistic masters, what are the Kabbalists trying to teach us here? Is it just a parable? Or perhaps are the Kabbalists wanting us to look in this sort of mirror, so to speak, through these stories and understand something about ourselves and something about our ontological, our existential relationship with the created world? In our case, fauna, animals. What you see here, by the way, is a historic photo because, to the best of my mind, it's the first time that we know of that an animal took a selfie of itself. So it's very suitable for our talk because we have here a mirror and the animal looking at itself, taking a photo, but before selfie becomes a word in a dictionary. Now, before we get into our Kabbalists, we have to ask a very important question. We have to quietly, in our own hearts, minds, ask ourselves, when we think of animals, what do we think? Animals are pets, right? There are, I'm sure, some here that associate animals with being pets. So, perhaps like the Chow Chow here, we have a dog or we have a cat. We're owners of these animals. So the relationship is we are the owner. We call the shots. We've sort of taken upon ourselves this role. We're aware of animals in nature that we don't really have any, right? Like the honey badger here on the top right, who, as cute as the honey badger is, you do not want to mess with a honey badger. So we associate animals with the word wild, animals that are out in the wild. What does that say about perhaps being contrasted to what we are, perhaps not wild, or trying to hide an aspect of us that perhaps is? So we have the kind of more domesticated animals, dogs being one kind, but then of course we have cattle, right, that are used agriculturally. If I had to have one more picture here, of course I would have a cow or an ox. One can't talk about animals without talking about caged animals. This is also part of, one of the elements. Zoos, right? Experiments, shampoo. There are all sorts of things that come to mind. Why did I bring in worms? So there's this idea that whenever we talk about animals, we always talk about charismatic animals, right? Animals that look good, animals that kind of, can be poster animals for the thing. Worms are not charismatic, so I'm bringing also worms. There are those animals that also we kind of detest or that make us, sort of, and there are those as well. So we have all sorts of thoughts about animals. Why is this an introduction? Because now we are ready to dive into the way Homo mysticus views animals. We know the way we do. I just want to raise these thoughts because context is important, context matters. So as a sort of, prologue, I want us to think about the way we view animals. Because it's through that question that we can then learn something about the way Kabbalists do. Now, as I already sort of alluded to when I spoke about the Zohar and Abulafia as our kind of two major trends, apart from our cosmic Kabbalah that's been neglected in scholarship, but by and large, there is no photo here, and that's on purpose. Now, some of you might argue, Johnny, you're exaggerating. The Zohar is full of stories of miraculous donkeys that can do this and that, and okay, and some of you might even say, oh, but there's St. Francis Assisi, right? The Franciscan monk who just in 2015, the Pope said we were wrong going with Thomas Aquinas, who said that animals are brute, yuck, and we should be with St. Francis Assisi because if we go with this Franciscan monk who called birds sisters and, sort of spoke to animals, then there is hope, not only for society, but for sustaining, a world that is sort of environmentally oriented and whatnot. The four animals I was talking about, so now we understand what I was talking about. And now you see the next slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so if anything like that happens, just let me know. So this slide remains empty because I would argue, I don't think everyone would agree with me, but I would argue that for many a Homo mysticus, an animal is not what you think about when you meditate. You're thinking about divine names, and then when you think about those divine names, the visions that appear in your mind are not flora, fauna, the inanimate, but surely not the pictures that we saw. What do we usually find with Homo mysticus? Here's just one of those quotes in the Zohar. That donkey driver, is he here? For sometimes in those empty ones, you may discover bells of gold. One of the common practices of the Zohar as an anthropocentric Kabbalistic masterpiece is to teach humanity that you never know who might teach you an important lesson. There is, for example, the infamous Yanuka, the infamous babe or child, that little toddler, that pisha that doesn't possibly know anything, and all of the sages and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai meet this Yanuka, and they're like, come on, bugger off, we're in the middle of doing serious stuff. And by the time they're done, the Yanuka is actually the biggest Kabbalistic master around. So too, there is Saba de Mishpatim. We meet the sort of, the grandpa or grandma who they're not really fully with it. They don't know what's going on, and the sages meet them, and they're slow to get to the point. But by the time they've finished telling us what they have to say, we understand we didn't understand anything. We understand that society is full of people that will always surprise you, and one of the anthropocentric practices of the Zohar, as a prize text of Jewish Homo mysticus, is never underestimate anyone. But notice here that the donkey is merely associated with the driver. And this is usually the way it is in the Zohar, I would argue, that even when animals perform miracles, can speak, can do stuff, it is because they are next to a righteous one. And it's due to the righteous human being, tzaddik, that things happen. And so, even if Homo mysticus does view animals, usually, more often than not, animals are part of emanation, part of one of the most basic tenets of mysticism and Kabbalah, in our case, and that is that unlike philosophers, who, if they believe in a God, the God is a sort of all-transcendental, detached from the world after creation, Kabbalists want to eat the cake and keep it whole. So they say, we believe in the Maimonidean transcendental God that you can say nothing about. We'll call that Ein Sof, sort of, And but we also have the immanent aspect of the Godhead. We call this panentheism, the idea that we also have the divine within the world, because everything we see around us is emanated, rooted in the divine. And therefore, at the very top of the scale are humans, and more specifically, specific types of humans, and the tzaddik, the righteous ones at the top, the creme de la creme. And animals, impure animals, they're very low down in the hierarchy. So this is usually, in fact, the Zohar even tells us that a pure animal is an animal that yearns to be part of human, which is to say, when you eat meat, you consume meat, then the animal doesn't become human, because that's your soul, but it becomes part of your flesh, and therefore, it's gotten an upgrade. And the impure animals are, part of the other side, the Sitra Achra, the dark side. But we're going to a different, now we're finished with our introduction, we're going now, strap your seatbelts, we're going now to a different kind of neglected Kabbalah, cosmic Kabbalah. When I say neglected, this is very important to emphasize, I'm only talking about the public, I'm talking about scholarship, I'm not talking about Kabbalists. Some of the most prominent Kabbalists were engrossed and very much influenced by the kind of Kabbalah we're going to learn about. The Baal Shem Tov, the Holy Ari, Do I need to name drop anymore? With Kabbalists, they get it, they know. It's that there's some, it's an enigma. Why this kind of Kabbalah? And we're talking about quite a few texts, prominent texts, important texts. Not much studies has sort of been pushed forward. But now we're going to look at how cosmic Kabbalists view animals. And the way I want to do this, I was debating how to do this, and I think it's better that we first just dive into a few stories. And feel free to comment, feel free to ask questions throughout. We don't have to wait for the end, it's okay. We're going to learn 3 stories. Each of these stories are what I define as a later manifestation, a later literary manifestation of cosmic Kabbalah. What does that mean? At the end of the lesson, we're going to look at how this all began. We're going to look at a few teachings of cosmic Kabbalah, or maybe even just one, but essentially a few teachings where it becomes apparent that animals matter to these Kabbalists. That they were very much fascinated by what is an animal and how is an animal connected to me and what is meant to be our relationship. And this was something that they meditated on. And it was connected to the Godhead. Okay, so this is a completely different system. But I don't want to start with that, I want to start with stories. Okay, so we'll start with stories and then we're going to ask ourselves, what inspired these stories? Okay, story number 1. Human-like fish or a mermaid? This story was probably penned somewhere in the 14th century in the Byzantine Empire, so maybe Greece, sort of that kind of area. 14th century Kabbalah. Within a book called Sefer Hapliya, which is a very famous Kabbalistic text, we have the following story. Once upon a time, my ship, the author says this, we don't really know who wrote Sefer HaPliyah, but we have a narrator. And every so often he tells a story, so it's fun. Once upon a time, my ship sailed at sea, and I peered overboard and saw a human floating like a fish. Notice, this isn't a fish, it's a human floating like a fish. I invoked an oath upon him, and he came upon dry land. I asked him, "What is your nature at sea?" He responded, "To protect your ship from a giant wave." And I asked him, "Have you heard any secrets of the alphabet?" Right, as one does when you find a mermaid, because this is another, option of what we've just encountered. And he responded, "I saw this secret in the book of Enoch." And I said to him, "Tell me." And he said, "Divide the letters into 3 groups of 9 each." I did so, and he said, "These letters teach every combination and all of the Kabbalistic knowledge, true wisdom, yada, yada, yada." What's going on here? Like, what do I need this for? Couldn't you have just said, right, this is a very terse, cryptic Kabbalistic text. You could have just said, I now want to dish out a secret about the Hebrew alphabet, and it's inspired by the book of Enoch. So question number 1, why do I need to get into this spiel of, this Bubba Maisa, this, story, once upon a time, there was a ship, and this, and what's this, notice that there seems to be a fascination for the narrator, or an obsession in this story, and we'll see it in the others as well, with ontology. It's very important for the narrator to understand, what are you? Like, what are you? So at first he sees a human floating like a fish. But then once he asks, what's your nature at sea? That implies the narrator understands you're not exactly human, because you're floating like a fish. Now, notice also the response is frustrating, because the response doesn't want to tell us anything about ontology. It just says vocation. Oh, you ask what my nature is? Now, nature, teva, means who are you? Who do I have business with? But this being, this enigmatic hybrid being, is being very cryptic and doesn't want to answer the question, and says, my job is to protect your ship. This is above your pay grade. We're not going to get into this. Once the author understands, it's kind of like Jacob. When Jacob meets the angel and they fight overnight, Esau's angel, and what does he say at the end? What's your name? That's what we want to know. Like, what is your name is like code for what is your nature. And what does the angel say? He says, forget about that. It's above your pay grade. I'll bless you. Same thing happens here. So what's the next best thing you can get? Okay, so tell me secrets about the building blocks of the world. This is very important, because this base midrash, the study hall of cosmic Kabbalah, is heavily based on Sefer Yesira, on the book of creativity, or the book of creation, or the book of formation. It's an A4 page. It's like, this is the size of Sefer Yesira, on average. And basically, Sefer Yesira is a book about how God used the Hebrew alphabet, and he used 10 sfirot. We don't know what these sfirot are when we read them in Sefer Yesira. So we have 32 altogether, like the teeth in our mouth, and almost like our spinal cord and a lot of other things in nature. We won't get into that. But he uses essentially, numbers and letters to create this algorithm through which the building blocks of the world are the alphabet. And what that means is there's alphabet in me, there's alphabet in you. We notice there's a common denominator. So notice that one must ask, is it by chance that it's a hybrid being that is teaching me something about the building blocks of creation? And then it continues, as I said, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so this is our first story, and here it is clear that this is not an animal. It's a hybrid being, but it's like a fish. Okay, and it has secrets to teach us, right? You would have thought, if the Zohar will find an unexpected being person to teach me something, or go to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the tzaddik. Those are my only 2 options in the Zohar, usually. The tzaddik, the righteous one, or the the unusual suspect, but human. So here we have a hybrid being. Now you might argue, okay, Johnny, this is one-off. No, there are many such stories. Let's move on to the next one. A lion, oh my. Once upon a time, I was wandering in a desert. Oh, so this is from Sefer Yesira. It's a different book offering Kabbalistic rationale to the commandments. I forgot to say, sorry, Sefer Yesira is a book that is all about Genesis. It's a Kabbalistic text about Genesis. Sefer Yesira, the next story we're going to read, is by the same author. It's like a sequel, or volume 1, volume 2. Sefer Yesira offers Kabbalistic rationales to commandments. Okay? And the story we're about to read here is featured in the introduction to the work. So one can't argue that this story is not important. This story is important. Once upon a time, I was wandering in the desert, in a place without water, when a lion approached me. Notice, this is not like a lion, it's a lion. As it is written, the lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. We say this every day. The lion fell into my lap. I invoked an oath upon him, commanding him to reveal his true nature. Notice again the obsession with ontology. I want to know what you are. He said to me, I'm not truly a lion. Now that, by the way, doesn't mean anything. That could mean that it was a lion, but that all lions that we see in zoos and safaris and imagine are not really lions. Or it could mean that the lion in the story was not a lion. We don't know. When I understood this, I issued a decree, and he was transformed into human form. Interesting. He spoke to me and regarded the Shema Israel prayer. This is what he said. The letter Shin, the first letter in Shema, is like a king, and from this stem kings who rule. Concerning this name, it is written, the king who judges. Immediately he turned to me and asked, what is the letter Shin? I began to respond, but he interrupted me and said, pay close attention and listen carefully to what the Shin teaches. In the first story, there is this idea that some of the deepest secrets of creation are held in the hands of hybrid beings. In this story, we already have an implicit rebuke of humans that don't get it, that don't understand. Right? The lion that perhaps is cloaked as a lion, formed as a lion, meaning you are in fact a lion, but you have a soul, right? I'm not truly a lion doesn't mean I'm not a lion. It means don't you dare define me by my body. I am my neshama. I am my soul. And my soul is my name. Right? There can be something very deep that the lion, meaning the lion is teaching here one of the most fundamental lessons of ontology, of being. The lion at the very beginning is teaching us, I am what I am. Who else teaches us this lesson? God. Moses, the burning bush. When I go back to Egypt and the elders are going to ask me, who is this God that puts us through this Holocaust and this slavery? I am what I am. You know, fluidity is the name of the game. Things change, things transform. And here the lion's doing the same thing. Notice that the narrator is saying here, a lion approached me. The human being perception is that I judge something by its cover. We are so superficial that when I see an animal, it's an animal. I can't even detach myself from the category animal. It's an animal. It's a wilde chaya. That's what it is. The lion's roar, right? So we have all these nice verses. And now, the author at this point, is modest enough to say, I saw a lion, but I'm not sure what it is, so I'm going to be cautious. And I'm going to ask, what are you? The lion then teaches the person a lesson and says, I'm not really a lion, which means the lion knows that the Kabbalist perceived this being as a lion. And so we begin with this implicit lesson: don't judge a book by its cover, don't judge a being by its cover. Look deeper. Now, it then continues on, and this is wild, because a lion is considered, right, the king of the animals, and lion is also, the word aryeh in Hebrew, lion, if you change the letters, is yirah, fear. One of the things we're meant to do in the prayer of Shema is accept that God is our God, He is the King, and we fear Him. We are completely submitted to God. There is also love, but there is first fear of God before there is love. And so there's also something to be said here about why a lion is chosen, and yet the ontology matters. It's like the author says, I don't want you just to think that this is a parable. I'm really interested in the essence of the lion and what the lion as a Kabbalistic master teaches me. So in our first story, our Kabbalistic hybrid being teaches us the secret of the alphabet. In our second story, we have a lion that's teaching us the secret of Shema Yisrael. No less. And not only that, after the lion begins teaching something about the first letter, just the shin, and the human reiterates supposedly what's been taught, the lion says, you don't understand, I want you to pay close attention. It's almost as if the bottom line here is, humans think they're smarter because they view themselves as humans and animals, but the trick is to understand what is inside. And once you look inside, you understand that we're actually all far more similar, but we're just cloaked differently. And our cloaking has something to do with our vocation, our job, our role, and whatnot. Third story, last story, before we conclude with our the kind of the teachings that inspired such a literary genre. Because this is very rare. I find these to be very precious stories, very rare stories. I don't think they've ever really sort of, they're not very much distributed. Even those that read these texts, sort of, it's kind of sidelines. Last story. Is it a bird? Know, my son, we're back in Sefer HaPliyah, the book about creation. Know, my son, that once there's also an interaction between the father and his son, the narrator who is telling his son something. Know, my son, that once I was walking, but it's always the same person. That's the point I want to establish. Know, my son, that once I was walking through the coastal towns when I heard a clear and comprehensible voice, though it had a tweeting melody to it. So it almost sounds like I can hear someone speaking, but there's a tweeting. The voice sang out, "Arise, we shall arise and destroy the world on account of those who abandon the Torah, lowly people." I wondered where the voice had come from. Looking up, I saw a bird perched on a tree, tweeting and saying, "Decreed to hell, for the Lord swore not to destroy." And I realized that the tweeting came from the bird itself. I thought to myself that I should bring it down and speak with it so that it might explain the matter to me, right? Like, what's this bird chirping about? Notice the question, right? Of all the questions our author narrator could ask, this is what he has to ask. This is such a Jewish question, right? Are you kosher or not? Are you a pure animal? Are you a pure bird or an impure bird? By the way, in brackets, I don't know if you know, but unlike terrestrial beings or animals or fish, where the Torah tells us what does a pure animal look like, what does a pure fish look like, there are no signs when it comes to birds. The Torah doesn't tell you. The Torah will name pure birds and impure birds, but it will not give signs. And here's a fun fact. Did you know? So what does this mean? It means, this is just a sort of fun, nice to have on the side. I'm shifting away for a moment. It means that halachically, according to Jewish law, usually the way one determines when you come across an odd bird, whether you can eat it or not, is, do we have a tradition? Do we have from word of mouth, father to son, rabbi to rabbi, this is kosher, we eat this? So when it comes to birds, tradition is very important. Why do I mention this? Because we have Thanksgiving, Americans have Thanksgiving, and when Americans start having turkey for Thanksgiving, everyone takes it as a given that turkey is a kosher bird. But then like 150 years later, I can't remember the name of the rabbi, someone comes in America and says, wait a second, we have no tradition that a turkey's kosher. And they look into it, and the sort of vast majority say, yeah, it's kosher. There is a little segment of Jewish population in America that till today will not have turkey because they'll say, we have no tradition. But anyway, the point is, it's an interesting question halachically because the narrator knows what to ask, but again, it's obsessed with the nature of the bird. The bird replied, why do you ask? Right? Like, what is this obsession with ontology? I answered, if you are impure, then it has been written, impure, impure shall you cry. But if you are pure, it is possible that it has been decreed to destroy the world unless they repent. So he says it's very important to establish if you're pure or impure, because if you're impure, you're just out to scare me. But if you're pure, then your words have value. Notice, even though you're an animal, this is a Kabbalistic teacher. This is a Kabbalist that says, if I understand the language of birds, like King Solomon, and it's a pure bird, it can teach me prophecy about the world. So, and even if they were to repent, right, because you might be telling me the world's going to be destroyed, and what's going to happen? And even if they were to repent, how could they? They are lowly people who do not know how and thus still require hell. The bird responded. Notice, it's very clear that the bird here is the master. The bird responded, I am a pure bird. But many times the righteous are fated to perish in the generations of the wicked. Their ways are sinful, their deeds unjust, they are filled with lies and evil. Therefore the Lord has said to gather them, annihilate them, and destroy the world. However, he has sworn otherwise. Then, in the name of the one who decrees, I command the bird to come down, and it descended, taking on a human form. When I saw this, I asked, who are you? He answered, I am the herald of these words, sent so that you may know them, so that you might bring the people to repentance and Torah, and if not, then at least so that you may avoid impurity. So again, it's not really cute. Actually, in this story, it seems rather evident that the bird is a bird. Both the bird and the narrator are comfortable with the bird being a pure bird at that, and that when it takes on human form, it is very clear that that's not what the bird is. It's just taking on human form. In fact, nothing has changed in the lessons of the bird. It's teaching Torah before it's human and after it's human form. And notice the way the bird defines itself. Again, it's like with the lion. What are you? And what does the bird answer? I'm not a bird. That's a silly question for you to be asking me, am I pure or impure? Notice, when the bird answers, I am a herald, I'm the herald of these words, that's who I am. Like an angel, I'm on a mission. And that is what determines who I am. You, simpleton, silly human, asked me the wrong question. You shouldn't have asked me, am I pure or impure? You should have cut to the chase. What's your role in this world? So we have here three stories that are, to my mind, are wild because they're very different to the sort of regular Kabbalistic stories. I think it's safe to say that we have here a reoccurring theme of this obsession with animals, and with the ontology of animals, and with Kabbalists that are fascinated by or that ask themselves, what is an animal? Like, that's the question here. What is an animal? And what comes across here is that an animal can actually be no less than a Kabbalistic master. Master sensei, right? So how does this happen? How do we get, by mid-14th century, in the Byzantine Empire, a whole Kabbalistic genre that has animals as Kabbalistic masters? The answer is very simple. For this, we need to go back to the beginnings of cosmic Kabbalah. A champion of this Kabbalah is Rabbi Joseph ben Shalom Ashkenazi, who, by the way, Rabbi Joseph ben Shalom Ashkenazi's thought, texts are quoted verbatim in Sefer Hakana and Sefer Apliya. And what I'd argue is the very stories we saw are a literary manifestation. They're an evolution of core Kabbalistic teachings that ultimately say that there is no, that a human's a cloak and an animal's a cloak, but that we're all from the same mush. And I just want to focus, because I look now at the time, we're going to focus on one passage. Anyone here who's interested in ecology, in a sustainable world, should know of a 6 or 7 page article by Lynn White Jr., who in the 70s basically said one of the reasons the world looks like it looks today is because of homo religiosus. It's not only because of homo religiosus, but it's because of one specific verse and the way it was interpreted. And that verse is, and they shall rule, right? Right after it says God creates humans, because we were created in Genesis 1:26, we were created in the divine image, supposedly only us. Cosmic Kabbalists will argue everything is everything. Then notice what we learn. So usually, Thomas Aquinas, for example, and many different, either mystics or religious leaders would say, we rule the land, and therefore we can do with it what we want. We view the created world as resources for our own, what we want. But notice what Yosef ben Shalom Ashkenazi does with this. And they shall rule, vayirdu is the word in Hebrew, over the fish of the sea. If a person is worthy, they shall rule. Radu. If you're worthy, then you will lead with the responsibility. If not, they shall descend, yirdu. You then descend. What does that mean? Before that. If a person's worthy, they shall rule. If not, they shall descend. This is what Genesis Rabbah tells us. Ashkenazi is now going to explain Genesis Rabbah. Because Genesis Rabbah, we don't really know what this means. Genesis Rabbah does seem to be pioneering this idea that humans have the utmost responsibility, or should have, towards the created world. And therefore, if you rule it responsibly, you're not in control, but you're partnering with existence. And if you don't, you will descend, meaning you're not worthy of being called human. Ashkenazi takes this to a completely different place. He says, all who transmit this teaching read it as follows. Radu. Now he gets into the different vowels and sounds. We're not going to get into all of this, but essentially what he says is if you follow the grammar and the different ways of understanding the verse, actually it means that if you lead with responsibility, then great. But if not, you are going to transmigrate into an animal. Why? Because you're not worthy of the cloaking of a human. You're not worthy, meaning your soul is what matters. And if you're cloaked as a human with a soul, and the way you operate the world is through control and tyranny, then you're a waste. It's not sustainable. I'm better off turning you into an animal, because, it's a waste. And so this idea is that, so this teaching is important because it creates a closer denominator between animals and humans, and basically says, I'm not thinking as a cosmic Kabbalist that there are humans and animals. Yeah, there are cloaks, but what matters is what's within. And if a human can't be responsible, your soul will become cloaked as an animal until you learn your lesson. That's what your role is. That's your role. But now if I ask, what is creation? How do these Kabbalists even view creation? And here's something fascinating. Cosmic Kabbalists don't view creation as just this one world. To be a cosmic Kabbalist means you constantly meditate on the idea that the world we live in today, that has racism, anti-Semitism, plagues, wars, but also good stuff, a lot of good stuff. But this complex world we live in is only one out of a series of 7 worlds that are created and extinct, and you go through a series of 7 worlds, each world with its own natural characteristics. It then goes through extinction. So what we're going to look at now is what the first world looked like. And what's interesting is these Kabbalists are meditating on the natural conditions of these cycles. Meaning, as we're about to see with animals, I might live in this world where an ox is an ox and a lion's a lion, but if I'm meditating on a previous world where all beings were aquatic, just like nowadays fish live in the water. We have a Kabbalistic manuscript that was penned in 1403 in Saloniki. We know exactly where and when, where you have a Kabbalist that tells you that the natural world before this world, much like Charles Darwin had said, encompassed our common ancestors of humans and animals. Hence, for cosmic Kabbalists, an animal is also a sort of sibling. And there were no hierarchies. There were no humans, there were no fish, there were aquatic beings. Now think of the first story we learnt. Is it a fish? Is it a mermaid? Is it by chance that the very same text that tells me that the previous world had aquatic creatures, beings, not mentioning humans or animals, happens to tell me the secret of the alphabet by this being that is not human or fish? Let's continue. What we just saw was what the previous world looks like for cosmic Kabbalists. Cosmic Kabbalists then tell us what's going to happen once this world is extinct. It'll happen at some point. And notice the conditions of the next world. Pay attention to this holy saying of the sages which explain the Lord's rewarding all beings for the reward for being in this complex world that we are in today. For in the time to come, in the cycle of the Lord Tiferet, that is to say the third cosmic cycle, the soul of an angel shall be bestowed upon the human. This is the reward of the human. And the soul of the human to cattle, and the soul of cattle to wild animals or birds or inanimate beings. Understand this and be joyous over this. What you've just been told is that for a cosmic Kabbalist, there's going to come a time where humans gain an angelic soul, which in another text we are told the implication is you're immortal. But that animals gain a human soul, and another text tells us this implies they will no longer be carnivorous because they will know God. And in a time to come, all are cured. You should know that every wild animal or pest, all will eventually be cured. And this is the secret of the verse. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion will feed together. For all will know me. Now you might come and say, I feel uncomfortable with this because animals don't need to be cured. But you know what? If you think about anti-Semitism and racism and a lot of things that humans do to humans, then these cosmic Kabbalists are saying we're all in the same boat. Everyone has to be cured of something. And what we're being told here is that the genuine nature of predators is not to be a predator. It's just like there are problems amongst humans, there are problems amongst animals, and it's got to do with the conditions of this cosmic cycle we live in. But in the future one, where animals gain human souls, they will know God. Right? You'll have an animal that's able to come in and daven with you. Who knows? This is what was meditated. Last act, and we close the curtain. These Kabbalists even envisioned a future in which, this is cryptic, so I'll just sort of explain it. And the wise will comprehend from the secret of their names of the Sfirot who governs in each cycle, the human species over the other species or other species over humanity. What's the essence of cosmic cycles? The idea is we have 10 Sfirot. The 3 upper Sfirot we don't touch. Like in the Zohar, we don't touch them. They're, beyond time, space, energy. They're their own thing. Chochmah, Bina, Keter, we don't touch them. But the 7 lowest Sfirot manifest themselves in the 7 millennia of this world. And each millennia is governed, determined by the specific sphere or characteristic of the divine Godhead that's in charge of that millennia. So too, each of the 7 cosmic cycles of 7,000 years each, the previous one that was just extinct and now we're in this one, each is governed by a different sphera. What Yosef ben Shalom Ashkenazi is telling us here is that if you understand the essence of a name, and notice that the obsession now with our previous author with the stories is understood, because the name of something tells you all of the secrets encompassed, past, future, present. So Ashkenazi is saying, if you understand what chesed means, the sphera of chesed, if you know how to unpack the sphera of gvura, the sphera of tiferet, you will understand the deterministic conditions of that given cosmic cycle. And it's fascinating that the example he wants to give is, for example, this is one of those mic drop moments. There might be a cosmic cycle where other species, namely the animal kingdom, there are no other species, will rule over humanity. That's a 13th century version of Planet of the Apes. That's what you're reading. 1280, 1290, penned in Barcelona in Hebrew. So this is our story. We're closing curtain now. And what have we seen? We've seen that we have a certain perception of what animals are. They're endearing. They might be threatening. There's a power struggle. There are commonalities. There are hopes. There are fears, whatnot. And then I said something about how I think we can understand a lot about Kabbalah through simply asking, what is an animal? And if I were to survey Kabbalistic texts and say, how does this Kabbalistic text view animals? I'm able to navigate my way through what is the goal of this Kabbalistic system. And what we saw is that, and if I go now backwards, from the people that brought you Cosmic Kabbalah, that says you need to rule in partnership. I didn't bring all of the text, we don't have time. But in partnership with other beings, in partnerships, the word shituf is one of the most popular words for cosmic Kabbalists, especially for Yosef ben Shalom Ashkenazi. You need to govern, you need to partner in existence. The role of the human is to help the inanimate flora fauna ascend, because the human is higher up in the hierarchy, not because you're deserving of more, but because you have more capabilities. And if you have more capabilities, it means you have more responsibilities. And given that we have a Kabbalistic system that doesn't view animals as lesser beings that deserve less, but simply as different, but a soul cloaked in something different, and part of the system of, reincarnation, that constantly beings are shifting from one to another, then what begins as a Kabbalistic cosmic school of thought in the 13th century in Spain transforms within a century to a Kabbalistic genre that starts telling us stories about animals that are Kabbalistic masters. So that's the story. Feel free to ask any questions, comments, complaints. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonnie, for this very in-depth and very interesting. And wow, there's a lot to unpack, because I didn't know so much about how animals are viewed by Kabbalistic masters. So we do have a few minutes for any questions. Feel free to write in the chat or raise your hand. And I know we do have a question in the chat from Tom. How does Pirkei Shira fit into this?
Right. So firstly, regarding the slides with Alex, so they'll be distributed, so you'll be able to go over the different slides, and feel free to if you have any questions, email me. There's also an extended article in an academic journal that this talk is based on, sort of a little bit, so anyone that wants background material, feel free. In terms of Perek Shira, that's a fascinating question. So we have Psalms, and Psalms is, like praises to the divine by King David or by other prominent biblical figures. It's an enigma, sort of who wrote what and when. And then we have Perek Shira. Perek Shira is this beautiful text that tells us how not only animals, but trees and everything in creation contributes or takes part in this wonderful orchestral song praising the divine. And it really is this big question, what are the authors of Perek Shira on? Are they thinking this or not? It's a fascinating question because, to the best of my mind, I have not yet once encountered Perek Shira in any of these texts. And in fact, I've never thought of that, but that's a fascinating question, because one would expect it to be there quite a bit. It isn't. That's a fascinating question. It could be that Perek Shira was viewed as as more potentially aimed at human beings, much like St. Francis of Assisi, the idea that I'm not really talking about animals, but I'm actually talking about the grandeur of creation and God, and that everything recognizes God, but implicitly there's this idea a human's going to pray. Like, are you doing what you need to be doing? So there's a lot to sort of ask about what are the intentions of Perek Shira. I know that a lot of, not a lot, there aren't many commentaries on Perek Shira. There are a few medieval ones and sort of early modern ones. None of them go in this direction. It's interesting. Perek Shira, a lot of the kind of, it's used more as a kind of ethical text, which again, one wouldn't expect. That's why this really is a great question. And then we have another question, Radu and Yerdu.
Well, actually, I was questioning a couple of sections of what you were speaking about. You mentioned if you're righteous, you rule. If not, you will descend. And you implicated that could be transmigration of the soul.
So I didn't imply. Yosef ben Shalom Ashkenazi, in the specific passage, he looks at the way you pronounce the word, because, right, what do we have in the Bible, or what do we have in Genesis Rabbah? Or in the Bible we don't have the vowels, we don't have the nikud, the dots, so we don't know how we read the word redu. Is it vayurd? And that's the question. That's why it suddenly opens up this whole hermeneutic game, because I don't know how I say it, and it could be without, redu, radu. If it's a i, u, it changes everything. So Ashkenazi says, I've identified, like Genesis Rabbah, that redu in a certain pronunciation is you will lead, or by responsibility be in charge. But another way is to descend. This already, hi Tani. This already is this is Genesis Rabbah, but Genesis Rabbah is enigmatic and doesn't tell us what that means. Ashkenazi, we didn't get into this today. I've spoken about this in previous calls. Ashkenazi has one law that is the central law. It's a prism through which he views all of existence. It's called Din B'nei Chalof, the law of transformation. It's the idea that reincarnation for Ashkenazi is not purgatory. It's not just like you find in other Kabbalistic systems, a punishment, or in Jainism or in Buddhism, a punishment if you don't treat karma the right way. This is, for Yosef ben Shalom Ashkenazi, the law of transformation is the manifestation of divine providence for all aspects of creation. It's to say, unlike perhaps what Maimonides had said, for Ashkenazi, God is watching over everything. So the stone matters, and the puddle of water matters. Everything is, to the point, by the way, where if I veer away from animals for a moment, Ashkenazi even had a sustainable view of punishment. The idea of hell is not sustainable. If I send souls of the wicked to hell, it doesn't help the world. But if the wicked don't understand their job, then Ashkenazi has this one hermeneutic move based on Job, where he'll say, puddles of water are wicked souls, because puddles of water are going to vaporize, and the world needs that. And so you're going to have certain wicked souls that are going to actually be sustainable for the world, unlike what they were doing when they were around. So I can't belittle enough, I can't sort of stress enough how the law of transformation is super important for Ashkenazi, and that the reading for him of this passage explicitly is that descend means, in this case, if you don't behave like the cloaked human that you should be, you will become an animal because you're worthless. There's no point. You're just not doing your job. That's not to say an animal is less important. It's to say, I don't need your soul as a human. I can put you in a chow chow and we'll be okay.
So that would imply a hierarchy with the human
Yes.
above.
Oh, is it a hierarchy or is it a scale of capabilities? Hierarchy implies, and it's not the same thing. You know what? If it's a hierarchy like parents in a family, yes. You have more capabilities and therefore you have responsibility over children, over pets, over what? I think that's the way cosmic Kabbalists view this. There is an Aristotelian hierarchy, and in fact, they always use the Aristotelian words for domem, tzomech, chai, medaber, inanimate, flora, fauna, speaking being. So they always use that, but they're constantly deconstructing it and creating these fluid boundaries. Because you're constantly questioning, but wait, what is a human? What is an animal if we all have this common denominator? I'll just throw in one more sentence. One of Ashkenazi's secrets is that the secret of formation is that all beings are encompassed or partnered with the human, and the human partners with them. That is a statement that puts the human in the center and yet completely deconstructs what human is, because it says, all other created being is human as well, has part human in it. It means that this cup has in it flora, fauna, human, bits and pieces of it, because we're all building blocks of our DNA is alphabet. And if we're all alphabet, then we're all we're equal, but we have different capabilities based on our cloaks.
And the cosmic cycles do away with that sense of hierarchy, correct?
Exactly. It's toppled. Exactly.
So, do you have a book or an essay or something?
I'm towards finishing a book titled Humanity in the Created World, Remapping Medieval Kabbalah. When it's out, it'll be out.
Okay, good.
So soon. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Wonderful. Really wonderful being here. Thank you so much for those questions.
Yes, thank you again, Jonnie, for this wonderful talk. And thank you to our co-sponsors, Har Shalom in Utah. And I just want to let everyone know about our upcoming class, which is tonight, which is actually the first official launch of BBM Las Vegas, with Rabbi Ben Greenfield on what we celebrate when we celebrate Hanukkah, 4 theories on unsettled questions. So happy Hanukkah to everyone. Have a great day, and we will see you next time. Bye now.